How in the world did a patchwork of ancient tribes become the largest empire on Earth and then lose the whole shebang? It's a fascinating question, right? If you picture a map of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula is sitting right there at the ultimate crossroads. You've got continents, oceans, and cultures all colliding. Because of that, for literally thousands of years, this land has been conquered, fractured, reunited, and just completely transformed over and over again. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're tracking the epic, turbulent journey of Spain. We'll find out exactly how a mosaic of prehistoric tribes evolved into a massive global superpower and why that massive pendulum of power eventually swung all the way back.
Okay, let's jump right in. The history of Spain is a true pendulum of power. It's constantly shifting between these incredible, dizzying heights of global influence and deep, dark periods of internal fracture. Today, we're going to unpack millennia of history to see exactly how modern Spain was forged in the fires of constant transformation. Here's our roadmap. First up, we've got early conquerors and Roman rule, followed by Al-Andalus and the Reconquista, and then the rise of global empire. From there, we'll track the centuries of decline and turmoil, navigate the tragic civil war and dictatorship, and wrap things up with the rebirth of a democratic Spain.
Starting with Part 1, Early Conquerors and Roman Rule. You see, long before Spain was a unified country, it was a highly contested prize.
Now, the concept of a mosaic is absolutely crucial to understand here. By the first millennium BC, Iberia wasn't just one monolithic thing. Far from it. It was this really diverse collection of indigenous groups, like the Celts and the Iberians, living alongside coastal trading colonies set up by Phoenicians and Greeks. But unfortunately for them, this incredibly valuable land got caught right in the crossfire of two ancient superpowers, Carthage and Rome. During the Second Punic War, the legendary Carthaginian general Hannibal literally launched his campaign from Spain, marching his elephants across the Alps to attack Rome. But Rome didn't just sit back. They struck hard, and by 206 BC, they'd kicked the Carthaginians out of Iberia entirely.
But here's the thing. Taking over wasn't easy. It took Rome nearly 2 centuries of brutal, grinding warfare against local tribes to actually conquer the peninsula, finally finishing the job under Emperor Augustus around 19 BC. They called this new territory Hispania, and Rome really left its mark. They built major cities, like what we know today as Zaragoza. They exported tons of olive oil and metals, and they deeply Romanized the local population. They even produced famous Roman heavyweights, like the philosopher Seneca and Emperor Trajan. But nothing lasts forever, right? As the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, Germanic tribes started pouring in. Over time, one specific group, the Visigoths, managed to unify the peninsula, and they essentially preserved that Roman culture and Catholic religion for over 200 years.
But the pendulum of power was about to take a sudden, massive swing. Let's move to Part 2, Al-Andalus and the Reconquista.
In the year 711 AD, Muslim, Arab, and Berber armies crossed the Strait of Gibraltar from North Africa. Taking advantage of a Visigothic civil war that was already brewing, they rapidly conquered almost the entire peninsula. And I mean rapidly, we're talking just 7 years. They called this vast new territory Al-Andalus. And this is the vital part. While much of Europe was struggling through the Dark Ages, Al-Andalus was experiencing a brilliant, flourishing golden age. We're talking massive prosperity, agricultural innovations like rice cultivation, and architectural absolute marvels like the Great Mosque of Cordoba and the Alhambra. Plus, it was a multi-religious society. The Muslims held the political authority, sure, but Christians and Jews were largely allowed to practice their faiths. That created this incredibly rich cultural and intellectual melting pot, producing brilliant philosophers like Averroes and Maimonides.
But as we've seen, empires eventually fracture. That powerful Caliphate of Cordoba eventually splintered into smaller, competing Muslim principalities known as taifas. And that fragmentation? It cracked the door wide open for the Reconquista. Up in the rugged mountainous north, small Christian kingdoms that had managed to survive the initial invasion, places like Castile, Aragon, and Portugal, started a slow, relentless push south to reclaim the land. This frontier essentially shifted back and forth for hundreds of years, but a huge turning point finally hit in 1212 when a coalition of Christian kings won a crushing victory and rapidly overran most of Al-Andalus.
Just take a second and look at that number, 781. That is the exact number of years Islamic rule existed in Iberia. It finally, officially came to a close in 1492 when the newly unified Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella of Castile and King Ferdinand of Aragon, captured Granada, which was the very last Muslim stronghold down in the south.
And that brings us perfectly to Part 3,
the rise of global empire, because combining Castile and Aragon set the stage for an explosive outward expansion.
You really can't overstate this. 1492 might be the most consequential year in all of Spanish history. It was defined by three massive events. First, the fall of Granada, which finally unified the territory. Second, a severe, ruthless push for religious uniformity. The monarchs outright expelled the Jewish population who refused to convert, and they aggressively expanded the Spanish Inquisition to root out anyone secretly practicing other faiths. And third, well, they decided to roll the dice and sponsor a navigator named Christopher Columbus. His arrival in the Americas just blew the doors wide open to unimaginable new territories and vast wealth.
This unlocked an era of just unparalleled power. By the 16th century, Spain had completely conquered the Aztec and Inca empires, and literal rivers of gold and silver were pouring into their treasury. Through strategic royal marriages, King Charles V ended up inheriting not just Spain and its colonies, but the Holy Roman Empire stretching across Central Europe. People said it was an empire on which the sun never set. And all this incredible wealth funded a dazzling Spanish Golden Age, giving us artistic masters like Velázquez and El Greco, and legendary literature like Cervantes' Don Quixote. But here's the catch. Being a global superpower is outrageously expensive. Spain basically burned through all that New World wealth fighting endless wars to defend Catholicism across Europe. They fought the Protestant Dutch, they fought the English, remember the doomed Spanish Armada, and they battled the expanding Ottoman Empire. It was a massive drain.
And the crushing weight of maintaining that massive footprint brings us right into Part 4, Centuries of Decline and Turmoil. Exhausted by constant war, battered by internal revolts, and severely weakened by the genetic consequences of Royal Habsburg inbreeding, the empire began to crack.
So, when the last Spanish Habsburg king died without an heir in 1700, it triggered a massive war across Europe. When the dust finally settled, a brand new French dynasty sat on the Spanish throne, the Bourbons. And it's actually pretty fascinating how desperately this new dynasty tried to stop the bleeding. The new kings, especially Charles III, rolled out what we call the Bourbon reforms. They brought in fresh Enlightenment ideas, modernized agriculture, built new roads and canals, and really centralized the government. And you know what? It actually worked for a bit. It revitalized the economy and clawed back a little bit of that lost global prestige. But then, the 19th century arrived, and honestly, they brought an absolute avalanche of disaster. First, in 1808, Napoleon completely betrayed Spain. He invaded and installed his own brother on the throne. That kicked off the brutal Peninsular War, which is actually where we get the term guerrilla fighters. Now, while Spain was hopelessly distracted fighting the French, its colonies over in the Americas seized their moment. By 1825, Spain had lost almost its entire mainland empire, from Mexico all the way down to Argentina. The rest of the century was just a blur of brutal internal conflicts, known as the Carlist Wars, a super short-lived republic that rapidly collapsed, and finally the humiliating Spanish-American War in 1898. That war stripped Spain of its last major colonies, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. The Grand Empire was officially gone.
That profound loss of identity and power sets the tragic stage for Part 5, Civil War and Dictatorship. Heading into the 20th century, Spain was a deeply polarized nation, just desperate for some kind of stability.
Following a failed military dictatorship in the 1920s, the monarchy itself collapsed. So, in 1931, the Second Spanish Republic was born. This new republic tried to push through sweeping, highly progressive reforms to rapidly modernize the country. They drafted a totally secular constitution, granted women the right to vote, started redistributing land, and gave a lot of autonomy to specific regions. But these massive changes deeply alienated traditional conservative factions across the country, especially the military and the church. The political pendulum was swinging violently back and forth with every election, and the nation was fracturing.
Then, in 1936, a group of military officers launched a coup. That was the spark that ignited the devastating Spanish Civil War. The whole country violently fractured into two deeply opposed camps. On one side, you had the nationalists. Led by General Francisco Franco, this was a coalition of monarchists, fascist groups, and conservative clergy. On the other side were the Republicans, who were defending the elected government. They were a mix of liberals, socialists, communists, and anarchists. And quickly, this conflict turned into a proxy war for the rest of Europe. Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy sent crucial military support to Franco's nationalists, while the Soviet Union and thousands of international volunteers backed the Republicans.
The war raged for 3 agonizing years, and it was marked by terrifying atrocities on both sides, like the infamous bombing of Guernica.
And the cost was just staggering. An estimated 350,000 Spaniards died in the conflict, with hundreds of thousands more forced to flee into exile. In 1939, the nationalists won. Francisco Franco established a strict, authoritarian, ultra-conservative dictatorship. He completely suspended political parties, heavily censored dissent, and actively suppressed regional identities, like the Basque and Catalan cultures, in favor of a very rigid Castilian culture. And his rule wouldn't end for decades.
Franco kept the country pretty isolated until the Cold War, when the U.S. realized his staunchly anti-communist regime made for a good partner. That partnership brought in investments that sparked some rapid economic growth. But the true political transformation? That had to wait for our final chapter. Part 6, the rebirth of a democratic Spain.
When Franco finally died in 1975, the man he specifically named to succeed him, King Juan Carlos, totally surprised the world. Instead of keeping the tight grip of the dictatorship, he championed a peaceful transition to democracy. And it's honestly incredible how fast Spain integrated into the modern Western world. By 1978, a brand new democratic constitution was passed. Notably, it created a system of autonomous communities, finally respecting that deep regional diversity we've been talking about since the Roman days. In 1986, Spain joined the European Economic Community. And by 1992, the vibrant, glowing Barcelona Olympics showed the entire world that a modern, prosperous Spain was fully back on the map. Now, it hasn't been perfect, obviously. The 2008 global financial crisis hit Spain brutally hard and caused massive unemployment.
But despite those steep economic hurdles, today Spain stands strong as a stable, resilient democratic nation. It still has to navigate some very complex internal dynamics, most notably the ongoing and passionate debates around the Catalan independence movement. But as we've learned today, those regional tensions are directly echoing the same desires for autonomy that have defined the Iberian Peninsula since long before the Romans ever showed up.
Which leaves us with this final thought. We've traced this incredible land from a mosaic of Celtic and Iberian tribes, through Roman conquests and Islamic golden ages, all the way to a global empire, a crushing civil war, and today's modern democracy. So after surviving millennia of conquest, empire, and fracture, what new transformation awaits the resilient pendulum of Spain? Take a second to think about that. Because if the story of Spain teaches us anything, it's that history is never static. It's just a constant, fascinating evolution. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today. Keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.